start by disconnecting the battery. Take the negative terminal off with a 10mm socket, back this nut off, and then lift up the terminal, set it aside to where it's not going to make contact with the battery. And at this point, my hold down bracket is already off. It's not really fully connected, but if yours is, then remove this nut with a 10mm socket, and then remove this bolt over here with a 10mm socket. And then you can take this hold down off. You don't have to remove it from the vehicle if you don't want to. You can just set it aside, kind of like this. That way you don't have to disconnect this fuse box. And in order to remove the battery fully, I'm going to now remove the positive terminal with the same tool. Get this off of here. This one's pretty corroded, so it'll have to be cleaned up before installation. But pop it off, set it aside. Now you can lift the battery up and out. Next, I'm going to loosen up this clamp for the air box here with a 10mm socket. Be careful with these because a lot of times they break. There we go. Now you can unclip the air box over here. 2 clips on each side. Pull it up, and I'm not disconnecting the wiring just because I want to flip it up and over. There's a little retainer here for this throttle cable. So pull the cable out. Okay, now we take the top of the air box, remove it from the intake ducting here. You can set that aside right there. Take out your air filter, set that aside, and now we have 3 10mm bolts in there. Remove all 3. 1, 2, and the third one right there. Now the bottom of the air box can come up and out of the vehicle. Now let's unplug the cruise control motor here. Pop the wiring harness off of the retainer over here. There we go, set that aside. And now you have 3 10mm bolts that I want to take off here. That's going to allow us to pull this whole bracket up and out of our way. Okay. Flip this up and over. Let's unplug this connector here for the starter trigger wire. Now we'll get a 14mm socket, and there's a mounting bolt right here, and then one directly on the other side, which is kind of hard to see and reach, but it's right there. Once those 2 are out, the starter can come right out of the engine. Let's take this front bolt out first. Okay, set that aside. We'll go to the rear. Take that bolt out. And now the only thing that's still connected to the starter is the main power wire, but that's underneath, so I'll take that off once the starter's free. At this point, it just needs to break free from the engine. Unhook these 2 so that you can pull this throttle cable aside, and then, well, if yours is seized into the engine like mine, I'm going to start out with a rubber mallet. That way I don't damage the casing of the starter. There we go. Work it back and forth. And there it comes. Get all this wiring out of your way. Pull it out, and remember, it's still attached with this main harness here, but at least if we can get it up at a working level, it'll be easier to disconnect. Let's pull this boot back. This exposes a 12mm nut. Break that free and remove it. Okay, cable came off, that's perfect. And here's your old starter. Put the new starter down, and let's reconnect this main power wire first. Make sure it's not full of corrosion so it can make a good contact. And make sure it's going in the right direction. It has this hook on the front, and that needs to go in between these 2 slots. Press it down all the way, reinstall the new nut. Let's snug it up. The new nut is a 13 millimeter. Snug it up. And you don't have to go crazy tight on it. Just bottom it out, make it snug. That's perfect. You don't want to break the stud that's in there. Put the boot back over to cover up the connection. Now let's bring the starter down and underneath this throttle cable and back to where it belongs. Okay, line it up with the hole in the engine. And once it's lined up, let's get the 2 bolts in. There's one. That one's started. Start in the other one as well. Let's snug them up. Okay. Let's make sure these are nice and tight. Let's plug in the starter trigger wire. Make sure it clicks in and doesn't pop back out. Don't forget to plug in this if you removed it, and then reconnect the little breather tube for the transmission to this throttle cable where it was. That way it's hung up, straight up, can't be flopped down. This is how air gets in and out. Let's get the cruise control module back in. Start the 3 bolts in, snug them up. Let's resecure the connector and then plug it in. Perfect. Let's get the bottom part of the airbox installed. Line it up with the bolt holes. Start the bolts in, and then we'll tighten them up. Set the air filter back in place, make sure it's facing the right way. And now get the top of your airbox, slide it back. On the bottom side, it has 2 hooks that need to slide into position. Put this in first, and line up the 2 hooks on the bottom. There we go. Slide it on, clip it to secure it, and then this cable was kind of snapped into this spring retainer here. Make sure that's back, and just double check all of your connections here, make sure they're still good. Let's snug up this clamp. Don't go too tight on these because they easily break. Let's get the battery back in. Put the hold down back. There's a hook. This should get threaded down. Put the front bolt back in and snug it up. Okay. And now let's reconnect the battery terminals, the positive first. Nice and tight. And then the negative. Make sure the terminals are both bottomed out. That way they make a good connection, and snug them up. Perfect.